So we're now going to have our third panel on language and caste in India. We have our chair for the panel here, and I'll invite him up to stage. So Suraj Kumar Tube is a fourth-year DPhil candidate at the Faculty of History, University of Oxford. The title of his thesis is Print, Language and Counterpublics, the Marathi Public Sphere in Late Colonial Western India. His work focuses on the non-Brahmin print and performative sphere by analyzing the content of their texts and writing styles. His work seeks to investigate both the radical and conservative streaks within non-Brahmin writers amidst their contestation of the hegemonic Brahmin writerly discourse. Thank you so much, Suraj, for doing this. I'll invite you on stage and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Moini. Thank you, Professor Uma, for having me on this panel, and thank you for having this panel in the first place. So that's a very sort of welcome addition to studies on education in South Asia. And so what I'll do is I'll just briefly introduce all speakers before their respective presentations. And as previous panels, I'll request speakers to keep to time. I will just let them know once they reach around 12 minutes to let them know that they have to just wind up quickly. So I think the first speaker is, do we have the speakers online? Yeah. So the first speaker is Mayur Gudupale, who's from University of Delhi, India. He's joining us virtually. He is an MPhil candidate in the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. As a part of MPhil dissertation, he's working on conceptualization of backwardness as category from colonial India to post-Mandal era. He's interested in the history of the anti-caste movement in colonial and post-colonial India. And his topic for today is a pedagogical language conflict between minorities and versus majority, a case study of Marathi language in Maharashtra. Mayur, yeah.
Thank you. This is Mayur. Shall I start?
Yes, you can start.
Yeah, okay. So today I'm presenting paper on pedagogy language conflict between minority versus majority, a case study of Marathi language in Maharashtra. So every pedagogy has an instructive language, which can be mother tongue or any other language. In general, the majority speaking language always exists in the form of domination in the educational sphere, and minority speaker have to adjust or accept with the majority decided pedagogy language. This is the common reality. When one looks at the Marathi language as a pedagogy instructive language, the relation gets reverse. So this paper will be theoretical paper, and this paper will engage with the debate on social hierarchy within the society and its impact on pedagogy language in a larger context. The conflict between the two dialects of Marathi language and its roots in the colonial construction of the vernacular language will be traced. In the domination of minority language, of instruction of pedagogy, how it's impacting on non-privileged majority with notion of purity and impurity will be traced through the available literature. And lastly, the response by non-Brahmins thinkers will be part of the discussion. So when we look the social and language demography of Maharashtra particularly, so Marathi as a language is spoken in the 5 states, like not only Maharashtra, but other states also, like Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, Goa, and Madhya Pradesh. But Maharashtra accounts large number of populations. As a state formed by inclusion of different regions like Konkan, Vidarbha, Marathwada, and Western Maharashtra, Khandesh, every region has own dialect. Interestingly, variation within region also reflect in the diversity of dialect, that dialects not only present geographic space, but cultural aspect, like Jadipatti from East Vidarbha region and the Varadi from the West Vidarbha region. However, despite having differences within a region, a commonality and differences of dialect has taken a place in the territory of Maharashtra based on caste location. So, particularly coming from Brahmin community has a common dialectical formation, and non-Brahmins have a different dialect according to different location. So, how dialect has as a language and pedagogy for learning has took place in Maharashtra, I will focus on this part. So differences of Brahmins and non-Brahmins in the sphere of politics, culture, education, and literature are historically debated in Maharashtra. The distinction between the dialect and language show the primarily through the differences as mentioned below. Language is a legitimized by the state through its administrative use in school textbook pedagogy, while a dialect gets restricted to day-to-day use by the community defined by region. Sharing space is also based on caste in rural as well as urban spaces. Different spaces of caste identities also attribute multiple dialectic form of Marathi. Attributing different dialects on caste identities is a purely linguistic problem or can be looked at through the sociological lens. Croce works gives explanation of dichotomy of identities and dialect. He argues working class and elite dialect is a different that reason cannot account it in linguistic differences, but it's ideological. Historically, on the on the Indian subcontinent, eliteness is associated with the particular privileged communities of Brahmins, which is a minority section, vis-a-vis non-eliteness of non-Brahmins that reflects in the dialect of Brahmins and non-Brahmins. Dialectical differences in Marathi language between Brahmins and non-Brahmins are shown by Guha in his work. In the southern part of India, differences between the Brahmins and non-Brahmins have studied by several authors. If dialect is different and language is the same, how does it affect pedagogy of language? The question remains unanswered in the context of Marathi language. Differences on dialect is not merely associate with the particular region and communities, but it's beyond that. It's directly associated with the power structure and language pedagogy, where certain dialect becomes language and other dialect remains only part of people, not language. In a social structure, non-Brahmins are majority. Their dialect is still known as a dialect, and Brahmins are a minority community, but their dialect is constituted around the language pedagogy. How is it happen? Where the minority dialect converted language pedagogy for everyone? The answer is located in the colonial history. When the colonial state started to standardize vernacular language for their purpose, their informers were drawn from the particularly Brahmin community. Constructing the language in standard form was wave in the 19th century. And Indian language also started to construct, including the Marathi language. Chauhan, Dilip Chauhan particularly, argued that it is constructed on the name of standardization. The question raised here, who was standardizing the language? For whom? Naturally, it was educated Brahmin class and the British. Different caste-based dialect in a different region were excluded from the construction and constructed based on dialect spoken by Brahmins, particularly from Pune. Exclusion of majority of non-Brahmins dialect from the construction created a binary in the learning process. For the non-Brahmins, the language which used to teach in the classroom based on the standardized version became an alienation. The student experience of learning Marathi in classroom was similar to learning any other foreign language. Recently, the government of India has introduced new education policy 2020. In the policy, up to 5th grade, suggested to give education in the mother tongue language. Marathi as a language is considered mother tongue in Maharashtra. The question raised here, in the light of NAP, whose language will be considered as a mother tongue? The majority of classrooms have continued teaching in the hegemonic Brahminical Marathi. The basic argument which was proposed that mother tongue has facilitate effective learning. However, the policy misses the objective by not considering the differences between the standardized Brahminical version of language and the language spoken by the masses. NEP 2020 unable to address Brahminical dominance on language pedagogy and learning outcome. If we sample some text from any textbook of Maharashtra State Board of Secondary or Higher Secondary Education, one can easily notice the Brahminical construction of Marathi. As a observation of 5th class to 10th class Marathi textbook, most of the chapters are written in a Brahminical Marathi. Very few chapters have added which has written by non-Brahmin authors. Interestingly, when students write the answer in the exam, and the question on non-Brahmin authors, and question on the non-Brahmin author written in the textbook does not equate to inclusivity. If someone wrote answer in non-Brahmin language, it will not consider answer up to mark, and one has to lose marks. So I would like to narrate one experience of Tejas, one of the senior editor in the Quint News web portal. Tejas Harad describe his journey with his dialect and textual pedagogy language. He narrate his experience with language and pedagogy of language. He said, "My mother tongue is Marathi. I also studied in Marathi medium school. The Marathi I spoke at home and the Marathi of the textbook were not the same. Our dialect does not have the letter, like there are several alphabet which not existing in our everyday life, but we have to learn just because of this alphabet decided by someone." So he narrate entirely his story, and his many of friends could not learn even though that he expressed this. So how it's, oh, that's construction, but how the notion of purity and impurity in the language has come. So the conception of purity and impurity has been used to describe relationship with caste location. The purity and impurity also constructed around the dialects determined by caste. Whose dialect is pure and whose dialect is impure depends on the location of the speaking group. In the West, you might observe that when a person from privileged family speaks his language, is indicate as a good vis-a-vis non-privileged person whose language is considered as a bad or vulgar. It was the class base. As the English language is considered vulgar or Polish is determined by the class of the speaker. In the context of Marathi language, it is determined by the caste location of the speaker. The non-Brahmin's language, dialect, and the way of speaking is always described in a demeaning form of words and expression like Gauran is rural person, or Gauti is like rural man dialect. Yeah, Ashuddha is like impure or ungrammatical. Contrast with the non-Brahmin description, Brahmin dialect considered as a purest form of language, educated person language, urbanized language, and elite, and the most important official and textbook pedagogy language. The construction of pure and impure language in the context of Marathi did not happen in isolation, but it's evolved in historically from colonial India. In Western India, when Marathi as a language was going to be standardized by British officer William Carey, he got assistance from by Pune-based many Brahmin scholars like Pandit Vajinath Sharma and many others. For example, R.V. Gunjikar, a prominent Marathi scholar in 19th century, expressed his admiration for construction of pedagogical language constructed by the Pune-based Brahmins by calling it the purest variety. Even if someone traces this debate on importance of Marathi grammar, Dadoba Panduranga Tarkhadkar emphasis on pure and impure language. His primary aim was to distinguish language to find out which one is a pure and which one is a impure. So extending the same argument, Bal Shastri Zambekar also put forward the same narrative of pure formation of writing and speaking Marathi. In the colonial period, when the construction of Marathi was going on, several intellectuals, mostly coming from the Brahmin community, were staunch advocates of Brahminical construction of Marathi. Vishnu Shastri Chimpunkar, commonly known as the Shivaji of Marathi language, wrote a Nibandhamala and promoted the pure form of Marathi. Year later in 1950, Savarkar would undertake the project of Bhasha Shuddhi. Savarkar expressed Shuddhi of Marathi language, means purifications. Again, if you trace the concept of Shuddhi, it was proposed by Swami Dayananda Saraswati to construct and reform the Hindu religion according to the Brahminical standard. By Shuddhi in the context of Marathi language, Savarkar meant to removing Persian and Urdu words from Marathi. Interestingly, he didn't advocate for non-Brahmin dialect inclusion in the so-called mainstream Brahminical Marathi. He also took Marathi as a whole and the pure form of Brahminical Marathi. Deshpande in her works has referred to both the concept of normalized language. Eventually, dialects spoken by the Pune-based Brahmins constituted as the standard and acceptable to everyone. The construction of pure and impure language came into text.
Mayur, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt. You just have 3 more minutes. So
Okay. Yeah. So how the, like, what is the response from the this language? So broadly, I categorize the historical response to the Brahminical construction of Marathi, its impact on pedagogy in three ways: acceptance without resistance, secondly, rejection and advocacy to adopt English language and move on from Marathi, and the third, critique on Brahminical Marathi language, but asking to inclusion of the other form of dialects. So in the first categorization, so Pune based Dadoba Panduranga, non-Brahmin social reformer, linguist, was aware of the various dialect, but his apologetic stand forced him to accept Pune based Brahminical version of language as a standard language. So most of the time he removed from the non-Brahminical dialect from the language. In the second category, Jyotirao Phule and the Savitribai Phule, where the Savitribai Phule's advocate for the learn to English, but at the same time, the Jyotirao Phule and the Savitribai Phule use non-Brahmin Marathi language in their writing. In the third response, non-Brahmin educationists critique Brahminical Marathi, but at the same time ask for the inclusion of non-Brahmin in different regional dialects. In the post-colonial Maharashtra, V.B. Kolte, who was Vice Chancellor of Nagpur University, asked inclusion and greater democratization of Marathi language for Bahujan Mahathir. So in the conclusion part, discourse in language politics are centered on the contestation between the language of the majority and minority language, where the former are shown to appropriate the latter. In this paper, I have tried to engage with the historical construction of language and its pedagogy. We show how the standardized version of language is a representative of minority privilege caste. It seems if minority is a privileged class or caste has controlled the knowledge production, then the language spoken by masses in its various dialects gets marginalized in the classrooms or in the pedagogy. That tends to create inferiority complex in the student coming from marginalized caste. This study, rather than concluding on the note, look forward to investigate this aspect further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayur. Thank you for that very interesting talk. We'll now quickly move to our second speaker, who is here with us, Soham Sahu. He's from IIM Bangalore, India. He's an assistant professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He's also affiliated with the International Inequalities Institute, London School of Economics, and Institute of Labor Economics, Bonn. His research interest is broadly in development economics with a focus on education, labor, and political economy. And he will be speaking today on the influence of teachers on the caste gap in English language education, evidence using matched student-teacher level data from India. So,
okay, am I audible? Yeah, sorry, pardon my voice. And yeah, I mean, thanks to the Education South Asia Group for organizing this conference and for giving me this opportunity to present this work. This is a very, very preliminary work, and frankly, I haven't thought through all the details of it. So this is like I'm going to present some results which we call as economists. And yeah, and also I'm an economist, so pardon me if I have a tendency to reduce the nuances into numbers, but I hope that they will still be interesting. So what we are going to do here is we are going to look at some data from school children in the secondary level of education in India. And this is a matched student-teacher level data. So we have information on the students as well as the teachers who are teaching these students. And we're going to look at we're going to look at the extent of caste gap in English language education, English language learning over the course of an academic year. And we're going to focus on a couple of aspects of teachers which come out to be relevant in this context. Okay. As I said, this is we are going to look at quantitative data collected by Young Life Study, which happens to be a project based at Oxford in the Queen Elizabeth House. And we are going to use some econometric techniques to document the extent of caste gaps. So this is like near representative data, a sample survey, right? And we're going to, as I said, we're going to look at a few aspects of teachers. Now, to give you some background motivation for this study, we all are aware of caste inequalities prevailing in India, and the position of English in this context is, it poses a promise and a conundrum at the same time. So, on one hand, there are studies which have documented significant positive labor market returns to knowing English. So knowing English can show a promise to access to better quality jobs, higher incomes, and perhaps social mobility, right? We are talking about caste here. Then relatedly, another interesting angle that comes out of the literature, and I think which also directly relates to Mayur's presentation, the previous one, is that Dalit writers have increasingly chosen to write in English, right? Despite the fact that English is a language, is a foreign language, it is distant from their mother tongue, and it has a colonial origin of oppression and whatnot, right? Now, this choice of English by Dalit writers as a medium of expression is motivated by a few factors. So one is, of course, the desire to reach wider audience, the economic reasons for choosing English, and also the challenge, to challenge the hegemony of upper caste Hindu culture. It may not be surprising to note that Ambedkar himself supported the articulation of Dalit struggle and its expression in English, admitting that he himself chose English as a medium through which he could access Sanskrit text, right? So the idea is that English, being a foreign language, does not have a history of caste discrimination. So it kind of gives a platform to Dalit writers for emancipation through self-expression in this language, right? So English seems to be therefore important from these two very different perspectives. One is the economic returns, and the other is the fact that it is kind of distant from their history of caste oppression. However, there are various social and economic barriers to learn English, right? There are like studies which talk about theory of cultural reproduction, and how students from more advantaged backgrounds, for example, having educated parents, having higher income, better background, better household background, they have an advantage to achieve higher levels of English proficiency, right? They also have greater access to resources, books, computers, English-speaking teachers, right? That can help them. So, in some sense, when we are talking about English, English learning in schools in low and middle income countries, as a in a broader context, it also reinforces these social inequalities, right? But by favoring students from more advantaged backgrounds, and in this case, to the extent caste and class are correlated, we know that students from upper castes would be benefited in this process. Now, these disadvantages in learning English can also spill over to learning other subjects, which can not only affect their labor market prospects, but also have a negative impact on students' psychosocial skills, right? So students can suffer from anxiety, stress, just because they are lagging behind their, better off classmates in learning English. And there are some hard evidence showing that even returns from studying STEM subjects like science, is complemented by knowledge of English. Like even if a person, a Dalit student excels in science, right, physics or chemistry or whatever, knowing English gives them certain advantage, which does not go away when they move in their life. Right? So that poses a problem. Learning English becomes important from various perspectives. So that's what I'm trying to motivate here. Now, despite all these importance, there is a lack of evidence on the extent of caste gap in English language learning in India. I'm not saying that there is lack of anecdotal evidence or qualitative evidence, but a lack of systematic evidence about the extent, right? So again, like as an economist, I would try to quantify the gap, the magnitude of the gap. One of the reasons why there is lack of evidence is that most data sets don't have measures of English knowledge, right? And don't have good measure of English knowledge. One popular data set that we all come across when we talk about education in India is the Annual Status of Education Report, or ASER. Unfortunately, ASER data doesn't have caste identifier of the household or the children, right? So which kind of restricts our understanding of to what extent there is caste inequality in learning. So what in this study I'm trying to do, I'm trying to explore this very unique data. As I said, this was collected by Young Lives study. So Young Lives has been running this project for the last 20 plus years. So they are trying to understand, the determinants of childhood poverty in developing countries. So they have been collecting panel data from 4 developing countries, including India. In India, they have been doing this in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So as part of their project, in 2016-17, they collected data from about 9,000 students. These students are class 9 students from 205 schools in these 2 states. So these 205 schools, they went to these schools and collected data on all the children who were studying in class 9. Okay, so this is like once the schools were selected, this is a census of all the students studying in these schools only in class 9. And they also collected data on the teachers who were teaching these students, right? So you know what exactly is happening between the teachers and the students. I mean, of course, based on all these variables, they have collected data. And they also collected data from the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year. So you not only sort of document the extent of caste inequality, which we are trying to focus here, at a given point of time, you not only get a snapshot of that, but also you get a sense of how things are changing over the course of the school year, right? So that's what we are going to do here, right? Okay, so here is a depiction of the extent of caste gap in English learning. So these graphs, they are showing the distribution of the scores. So these are independently collected test scores. So there are about 50 questions that the Young Lives survey team went and administered these tests on the children. So you have this gray. I'm not sure if this is visible. Yeah. So this particular curve is for the general caste, right? I mean, these are broad caste categories, not the jati level information. So these are like the general caste students, and these are the scheduled tribe students, right? So you can see as if there is a sort of monotonic relationship between the caste hierarchy and the learning outcome, right? And this is present in both the baseline and the endline score. And what is very striking, at least for me, when I drew these graphs, that these, the gap between ST especially and the general is very, very stark, right? So if you think about the average would be for general about 35, while for ST it would be about 15. So you're talking about like 40 percentage point gap in the performance of these students belonging to different castes. right? And then gradually the scheduled castes, they have slightly better levels of learning, and the other backward classes have slightly better, but these general caste students seem to be performing, their performance is completely in a different region, right? So it's completely uncomparable with these students from the disadvantaged castes. Now, to benchmark this sort of distribution, right? As we saw, this is present in the baseline at the beginning of the school year as well as the end line, which is the end of the school year. Now, to benchmark this, if we compare it with gender, we find almost no gap by gender, right? Here is a second benchmark, which is math score. So the second benchmark is with math score, and we again find that similar caste gaps emerge, but the caste gap in math score seem to be lower than the caste gap in English score, right? So English seems to be something where the caste gap is really tremendous. Now, as I said, we are going to focus on a couple of teacher-related factors. So one factor is, as part of the teacher questionnaire, teachers were asked they were given this statement and asked to respond in this 4-point Likert scale to what extent they agree with this statement. The statement is a child's caste background affects how well they can learn. And as you can see, about 22% of the teachers agreed with this statement, right? Now, how exactly they perceived this statement, we don't know. This is open to interpretation, but we are going to see that this has implication for students' learning. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 types of results now. This is the first set of results. There are a lot of numbers, but forget about them. So let me just tell you what they mean. So they mean that what we are doing here is we are estimating a value-added model of education, where we are running a regression where we focus on the endline test score after controlling for the baseline test score and look at the caste gaps. Right. So what it means is you are essentially identifying the caste gaps that emerge this one academic year. Okay, so you equalize all the students at the baseline and see how caste gaps are changing in the course of this academic year, and it clearly shows that there is a significant caste gap. And again, the same type of pattern that the caste gap is highest for ST students emerge. So that's the first result. This is the second result. So here we are trying to exploit teachers' belief about the role of caste in students' learning ability. And we're going to compare students who are taught by teachers who agree with this statement that caste matters. Caste affects the ability of the students to learn, right? And we find that when disadvantaged caste students are taught by teachers who manifest this type of belief, they are harmed more. Okay, so and this result is very robust. So this is running a very rich econometric model, and we still find a very precise estimate on this effect. So this is the third result, where what I'm trying to do is I want to compare students who are taught by a teacher with the same caste identity versus a different caste identity. Okay, so these are plotting the caste gaps. So let's focus on OBC students first. What we find here is that when OBC students are taught by teachers who share their caste identity, the gap in English learning between OBC and general students disappear. Okay, so it's 0. However, when they're taught by a teacher of a different caste, the gap is there and significant. The same thing emerges for AC students. If they are taught by a AC teacher, there is no gap. But if they are taught by a different caste teacher, there is a significant gap. However, such thing is not present for ST students. It doesn't really matter what the caste identity of the teacher is. If I am an ST student, I'm always going to underperform with respect to the general caste students, irrespective of the caste identity of the teacher. Okay? So that's it. So what I have tried to do here is, I have tried to give you 3 snapshots of results using a quantitative data. One is that there is a very large, significant caste gap exists in English learning in India, and it's highest for the tribal students. Teachers' beliefs seem to play a very important role in this. Teachers' beliefs about the about the importance of caste in determining students' ability to learn, right? And finally, teachers' own caste identity seems to also play a role, but not for ST students. Maybe because they face disadvantages in so much of disadvantage in other dimensions that just teachers' caste identity doesn't play a role. Okay? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Soham, for that very, very engaging presentation. And before I move forward, I just want to give a quick reminder to all those joining online. We will be taking your questions towards the end of the presentation. So please keep your questions coming. Our third speaker is Karan, who's joining us virtually. He is a doctoral candidate from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi, in the School of Education Studies. He has completed his MA in education from the same university. He is also the recipient of Ambedkar University Delhi Merit Research Fellowship. His research interests include caste and marginalization in higher education, politics of language, sociology of education, experiences of Dalit Bahujan students in higher education, issues of knowledge production in academia, Dalit feminism, and ethnography. And he will be speaking on, quote, "We are left behind in the race of academic competition," end quote, experiences of inclusion and exclusion in higher education. Karan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Suraj, for the kind introduction, but I can't somehow, share my screen.
Just fixing that.
Yeah.
It should work now.
Yes, now it is. Yeah, I hope my screen is visible now. Yes. So as you can see on the screen that, the title of my presentation is, we are left behind in the race of academic competition, experiences of inclusion and exclusion in higher education. So my paper attempts to understand the everyday experiences of inclusion and exclusion by exploring the narratives of Dalit Bahujan students in one of the public funded English medium universities in Delhi, India. It draws from an interview-based study to explore the narratives of Dalit Bahujan students to map their educational experience while taking medium of instruction as a case in point. Therefore, the paper engages with the framing of marginality at the intersection of caste, language, and the background of Dalit Bahujan students. So this is the roadmap. I have divided my presentation into 6 main parts. Yeah, so the medium of instruction has been a subject of debate and deliberation in the context of higher education. It is seen that many new universities as a policy measure adopt English as the medium of instruction, which often becomes a challenge for the students coming from the socioeconomically disadvantaged context. So English education is often seen as an empowering instrument for Dalit Bahujans that would support their fight against injustices and oppression born out of the caste system. So there is a growing aspiration among different socioeconomic identities to study in English medium educational institutions. While English education is seen as a way to achieve equity and social justice, the denial of quality English education at the school level compounds the exclusion of Dalit Bahujan students when they reach institutes of higher education. Scholars like Ajit Mohanty, Shivani Nag, Ramanathan, they have argued that how educational institutions and their curricular policies, they are not neutral and they create hierarchies on the basis of language. Yeah, so my presentation bases its understanding of caste on Kabir's work that has argued that, how certain groups in society are locked out, they are set apart in realizing their potential through the process of cultural devaluation, while caste-based discrimination and caste conflicts are well studied. The everyday routines in which caste operates in society have gained attention in the literature recently, particularly in higher education. So this paper draws on this literature while understanding that caste conflicts are prevalent across institutional sites, but their forms are not always overt. So these conflicts are often fragmented, undefined, unarticulated, and silenced. Frere's and Delpit's works, have conceptualized how the culture of silence and silence dialogues, respectively, omnipresent in education, they are instrumental in operation of the marginalized groups, while they suppress, conflict and resistance, and create a passive and suppressed self view among the students from the oppressed oppressed groups. To understand these silenced conflicts, this paper, draws research and organization studies that demonstrates how institutions and groups, they develop a culture of silencing and not acknowledging conflicts. So Roth and Kleiner have argued that, many organizations have an unsaid cultural practice. Now I'm quoting them, don't tell someone you have a problem unless you have the solution, unquote. So these works also indicate that, I'm quoting now Perlow and Repening, that, those who fail to reveal those who fail to reveal their thoughts and feelings often experience stress, dissatisfaction, cynicism, and even depression. Those who do not speak up often come to perceive that their perspectives don't matter, unquote. So these situations develop institutional pathologies leading to, failure to cope and eventually being pushed out. Educational institutions which are aimed at countering and compensating structural deprivation, they perpetuate a sense of inadvocacy among the marginalized students. Language, or the medium of instruction, is noted as a significant aspect of Dalit Bahujan experiences, where the axis of caste and class, they become indistinguishably intertwined. The medium of instruction is, what Sukumar calls as, it is one of the potential minefields that pushes marginalized groups to drop out from higher education institutions. However, the engagement with the intersection of caste and class in the context of medium of instruction in higher education is at its nascent stage. So these are the research questions. So how do Dalit Bahujan students experience English medium education? What was the rationale behind instituting English as the medium of instruction? How does socioeconomic background of Dalit Bahujan students influence their access to or participation in higher education with respect to English medium education? How does university facilitate the inclusion of Dalit Bahujan students in providing quality English education? So the data has been collected through open-ended, prolonged face-to-face interviews in 2019, following the conventions of qualitative research. The data for this study has been, collected through interviews, semi-structured interviews with 10 students, 4 undergraduate, 4 masters, and 2 research, including 6 male and 4 female students, and 3 faculty members, including 2 males and 1 female, from a public university located in an urban context in India. Like many other higher education institutions in India, the university prioritized English as the medium of instruction, not exclusively though. Yeah. So these are the findings. So students are not only asked or expected to speak, write, and read in English, but they are also expected to be able to think in that language. Many students who have been denied quality English education at the school level, they feel insulted, they feel alienated when they see people around them speaking in English and, see themselves battling in English. So it is like, now I'm quoting Jairam, it is like a constant fear of being treated as an inferior category among the educated. So it is evident from the narrative of Vani, where she, shares that, there is an English speaking environment here, that most of the time people will be talking in English. They are so fluent in English that if you talk to them, you will feel that there is an unset restriction to speak and reply to them back in English. So then Nishant also shares that, when I feel disrespect when I don't speak in English, because everyone around you is speaking in English and you are not. The impact of such alienation is that such that that most of the students from the marginalized communities, they either drop out or get semester back. They develop a feeling of inferiority and a sense of not belonging to a group. Vikas shares that first of all, we feel hesitant to get up and put our thoughts in front of class, but it is not related to just putting your thoughts forward, but putting it in English and getting acceptance in class also matters. Therefore, I felt it during the class participation that you will only get acceptance in the class when you speak in English. He further adds that, I got semester back due to English. So students who come from such, contexts are often silenced, either because they hesitate or as they are not left with any options. So language in this context, Bell Hooks also argues that, how language becomes a tool to, shame, colonize, and humiliate the oppressed identities. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, so all the student participants in this study were first generation Dalit Bahujan university goers with parents having, barely having completed higher secondary education. The home languages of students were Hindi, Bhojpuri, Marathi, Haryanvi, Bundelkhandi, Rongpa. So English for them was, used only for academic engagement. However, each of the participants had an aspiration to learn the language. Nishant shared that, we are left behind in the race of academic competition. We are left behind in the race of scholarship and in the race of grades and class participation and so on. I always write my assessments in English because we are burdened with so many tags. You are weak. You don't have the capability to get disburdened. I write in English even though I get low grades. This is also the reason that we don't get merit scholarship. Right. So English is clearly a barrier for them to participate in the university. However, the aspiration to learn English is something that pushed them to continue in the English medium university and prove themselves. The participants' use of, continuous use of we to explain these experiences needs further investigation, but it indicates that, how they were articulating their individual experiences as connected. Another issue which is often faced by students from the marginalized communities, it lies with the difficulty in comprehending the reading material and access to reading material, because to read, either one needs printout of the material or laptop, smartphone to access material, both of which have cost. Therefore, students saw the medium of instruction as a question to access to learning. So based on the interviews with faculty members, the rationale for prioritizing English as the medium of instruction was explored. The dominant narrative was, argument was that quote unquote good resources, and literature is in most domains of higher education were available in English. So let us keep English as the medium of instruction. Another faculty, explained that how he agreed with the understanding that, how English instruction is essential for all, as those who have been denied quality English education at the school level will not be denied quality English education at the higher education level, unquote, especially in the view of popular aspiration for the language in India. Therefore, the teaching in English, it was seen as a means for inclusion and equity. Connected with, this argument was another argument, was the reason that, English was seen as a global language, which will help students to enter both job market as well as, for further higher studies. So the participants' narratives, also allude as to how the rationality and pressures of the global knowledge economy have seeped into higher education pedagogic choices and institutional common sense. So these are some of the institutional mechanisms adopted by university to facilitate the inclusion of Dalit Bahujan students. So since it's a public university, public funded university, it follows reservation policy and fee waiver policy. Though the mode of assessment in entrance exam is is English, university also recognized that, students from very socioeconomically and linguistically diverse contexts are going to, apply in different programs, and therefore it does allow students to, write entrance exam at least in Hindi apart from English. However, in order to help students to begin their journey towards English medium instruction, university started some of the bridge courses, for instance, English language proficiency course. So these courses were included in the curriculum of the undergraduate programs. Although students at the undergraduate level get language support through these courses, some students, really felt that the duration of these courses, therefore limiting their scope, was, is not enough to make transition towards English. Therefore, university had, university also had this provision of, peer mentoring session where students from, senior cohorts devote some hours in a week to help their junior peers in enhancing their academic reading and writing skills. Though some faculty members did support students in making transition by, summarizing the key concepts in Hindi, providing easier academic text. Yes.
Karan, sorry to interrupt, but you have 3 minutes left.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So some of the students also developed their own strategies for learning English. One of the participants shared, at that point, at that point of time, I started to do extra study. For instance, I used to watch online videos to understand sentence structure and vocabulary. I struggled a lot in the initial semesters, but the idea of doing extra supported me. Yeah, so let me conclude that. Yeah, so the finding of this study revealed the experiences of marginalization in higher education and considerable gap between the socioeconomic backgrounds and institutional knowledge and pedagogical structures. So there was no aversion to language. Students do want to learn language, but rather the problem lies with the lack of facilitative structures and their socioeconomic background. Higher education spaces are, considered as spaces where knowledge is produced and shared. However, this production and sharing is often in a language which is, which only students from privileged backgrounds can meaningfully participate in. Therefore, the question of medium of instruction, medium of knowledge production requires thinking on whose lives and voices are to be included in the curricular and pedagogic processes. The voices of the margins will never be able to occupy centrality in higher education unless these becomes a part of our teaching learning process and academic writing. So the finding of this interview-based study point that considerable gap between the socioeconomic backgrounds of the students, institutional knowledge, and pedagogical structures are rarely systematically, thought about in higher education institutions. While this study indicates the proficiency in English, how English acts as an axis of exclusion that operates by silencing articulation of conflict by creating self-doubt. However, at the same time, Dalit Bahujan students aspire for English medium education to achieve social equity and, mobility. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you for that very engaging presentation. Now we have a final speaker who is with us over here, Nilesh. Nilesh Sawant, he is currently a PhD student in sociology at the University of Edinburgh. His research interests are caste, schooling, curriculum, and anti-caste pedagogies. In particular, he's looking at, quote, teaching caste in classroom, end quote. Prior to joining the department, he completed his MPhil and MA in social work from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. And he will be speaking on language of caste in the school textbook in India. Nilesh.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nilesh, student at University of Edinburgh. So my title of the paper is Language of Caste in School and Curriculum. So specifically, first I will start with the quote of the B.R. Ambedkar about how the caste discrimination happened on the basis of the caste in India. So the various form of the discrimination and exclusion which inherent in the Indian society have prevented in progress and advancement of marginalized section of its population. The social structure of caste system through the principle of gradation and rank established by Hinduism Varna system restrict to access economic and social right to oppress marginalized. This system entail an unequal assignment of economic, education, other civil rights across the lower caste. So in the context of education, the Ambedkar thoughts, for Ambedkar, the progress of India depend upon the education. The education model needed to help create consciousness among the all youth, regardless of caste, about all caste as a dilute the caste system stronghold in Indian society and allow India fully progress. Hence, Ambedkar prioritized fostering the casteless and classless society in part by the influencing national consciousness in the youth. In the introduction, I have covered the various existing educational policies. And so, since the independence, there are many existing educational policies, and so one of the recent policies state introduced NCF 2005, national curriculum framework, which emphasize on critical thinking so critical thinking on social issues, including caste. So this is my introductory chapter of my larger research. So since the independence, many changes have been introduced in educational policy and law to make education universal, accessible, modern, and secular. So India has introduced many policies such as the National Education Policy 1968, 1989, 2020. There are other policies for affirmative action. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan 2001 is Universal Education for All, Right to Education Act 2009. And these policies act as a constitutional safeguard to strengthen the weaker section of the population. Despite the several educational policy, discrimination still widely prevalent in the school. So I have referred to some of the literature over here. Many studies about done in the rural school. Still, it's prevent the caste discrimination happening in that school. So, number 7, explore the caste prejudice against the Dalit student. For example, they are not allowed to drink water from the common water pitchers. Caste-based sexual violence as a barrier to education for Dalit girls. Then another studies highlighted about Dalit girl are teased by the other caste students and face harassment at the hand of the teacher, including scolding, insult, physical punishment due to their poor performance. The Balkrishnan and Subramaniam and Vasvi, their studies reveal teasing and harassment of students for their caste identity. So some of the studies related to the teaching caste, how caste taught in the school. So teaching caste is I have focused, my research focus is basically national curriculum framework. So there are two framework state has introduced. First, National Curriculum 2000 that has introduced in the BJP government, Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP government, and there was the heavy criticism on it. And the NCF 2000 faced the heavy criticism for promoting Hindutva ideology in the curriculum. So the coalition government introduced another framework that is called National Curriculum Framework 2005, and that framework is very innovative, and that's talking about the critical thinking and caste in that framework. Critical thinking and critical thinking should be with social issues. So how, like the question about how caste taught in the school. So there are some of the studies which I will tell you here. Mittal 2020 reveal about a classroom discussion of caste usually end up with the assertion of caste and group identities and derisive comment. Bansud and Kane studies suggest that teachers face the difficulties about teaching. Teachers face the difficulties in teaching about the caste issues such as caste-based sexual violence, even at the university level. The studies suggest that students do not have critical reflect on caste issues during their schooling year. Students also have fairly limited knowledge, understanding about the caste issues. So, so here I'm looking at how, as my larger research is looking at how caste is taught in the school. So for that, I have first using the textbook analysis method because of this curriculum inbuilt in textbooks. So for this paper, I have qualitative textbook analysis. So there are some of the author already have used this method, qualitative textbook analysis, to analyze the concepts such as casteism, communalism, and secularism in 3 sects of curriculum. Then Patil used feminist approach to analyze the feminist curriculum pedagogies in textbooks. Following them, I have also analyzed the meaning of the content of the caste description in the textbook of Maharashtra state curriculum. that based on the national curriculum framework, that's the Maharashtra state curriculum has, there is a separate curriculum, the state curriculum. So I have choose here 3 textbooks, 8th class, 9th class, and 10th class textbooks of history and political science. I have analyzed. So here is some of the analysis in the textbooks, history and civil for class 8. They have mentioned about Dalit movement. So they have mentioned I will read the description about it. The Indian social structure was based on equality. Social reformer like Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, Narayan Guru brought about the awakening of people against the unjust treatment given to the Dalit in the society. Following teaching of the Mahatma Phule, Gopal Baba Walankar, Shivram Baba Kamble worked for eradication of untouchability. In 1888, Gopal Baba Walankar, in his book Vittal Vidhavarsan, condemned untouchability. Shivram Baba Kamble started the magazine Soma Vamshi Mitra on 5 July 1908. He raised the voice regarding the issues of Murli and Jogtis. He also took the initiative for marriage of Devdasi. Although this seems like a detailed engagement with the figure in the movement, to closer look reveal issues of concern. Firstly, this paragraph above discuss the social structure based on the equality, but does not provide a specific example such as the caste discrimination and its characteristics. Secondly, the contribution of Mahatma Jyotirao Phule and other reformers clarify who Dalits are, how they discriminate against. Finally, although the untouchability is often connected with the caste, an author failed to address the degrading and inhuman nature such a treatment, which is what gave rise to Dalit movement. The language used to discuss caste-related topic, in other words, is unclear and a lack of critical perspective. So then there is in textbooks history and civics for class 8 description about the lower caste leader Shahu Maharaj. In this also description, as compared to earlier section, there are several strengths in this section. This paragraph does not discuss the limitation imposed on certain caste and the use of specific terminology related to caste system. Terms like roti bandi in this description, it's talking about the roti bandi, beti bandi, and vyavsay bandi. It's about prohibition to interdining. Roti bandi, interdining, then prohibition to intercaste marriage, beti bandi, prohibition to pursuing certain occupation, vyavsay bandi. So these issues remain. However, on the number counts, there is no real sense of who Shahu Maharaj was, which state he ruled over. Untouchability again is conspicuous by its absence. And the text did not provide a critical analysis of the Balutadari system, which as Balutadari system is also mentioned over here. So there are the another description in class 9, description of Ambedkar in the class 9 lesson on struggle for equality. So Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar brought about the change in our traditional mindset. He brought it about the medium of Indian Constitution. According to our Constitution, all Indians are equal before law, and they cannot be discriminated against on the basis of religion, race, caste, gender, or place of the birth. All the citizens have right to freedom of speech and expression, freedom to accessible, freedom to assemble peacefully without arms, freedom to form association, freedom to move, to live, and settle down anywhere on the Indian territory and practice any occupation. Indian citizens living anywhere in the India enjoy the right to nurture their language, script, and culture. So this is the discrimination has given in the textbook 9. Given the silence around Ambedkar, like Saltaude has he studies in the post-independence talking about given the silence around Ambedkar in early post-independence textbooks, and this is the welcome development. The language used describes him, however, require analysis. The first point to make to note how and the problem of caste is confined to caste and is present as having been resolved by the constitution. Secondly, it is important to note how Ambedkar here is limited to his work on the constitution. Babasaheb Ambedkar made a significant contribution in various fields, including journalism, politics, religion. He established newspaper. He founded Indian Labour Party and was the first law minister of India, independent India. So this is another discrimination in class 10. Here is also they have talking about the subaltern studies, Marxist historiography. They're talking about Ranjit Guha, then Mahatma Phule, then some of the Ambedkar textbooks about Ambedkar book about who were the Shudras, the untouchables. But here is all the concept has given the abstract entity. It's not given the it's in the concept notion. So there is no clear description about the caste in the textbooks. So my main I would like to conclude over here. So the language used to discuss caste in textbooks is not clearly defined, leaving the room for confusion and question about how students understand the concept related to the caste issues. Additionally, it's important to consider how teachers are teaching this concept, which pedagogical are being to use to ensure critical understanding of caste terminology related to law and regulation. So my main focus is the task, the description of about the caste in the textbook is an abstract entity. Then how teacher and students understanding the caste with a clearly manner. So that's what the textbook analysis will feed into the interviews. While going to the interview, I will ask about this analysis, how student experiences teaching caste, how teacher face the problem while teaching the caste. So these things feed, this paper will I will look at in my larger research. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for the incredibly rich presentations. I'm sure everyone has a lot to think about a range of issues. I think there are 2 or 3 themes which I think run through all presentations. Caste discrimination in university spaces and colleges, of course, is one of them. The English language question is something which is very interesting, I thought, which I think one of the presentations also talks about in terms of how English can be seen as one of the axes of marginalizations. And I think we can definitely think more about that. Soham gave a very interesting presentation with the data set, and at least it was completely new for me, and I'm sure most of the people would have some questions on that. What I'll do is, I think I won't spend much time on giving a general sort of overview, but I have some very specific questions for all our speakers. I'll start with Mayur. Mayur, I think I have two specific questions. So when you talk in terms of majority and minority, so broadly we're talking in terms of Brahmins and non-Brahmins. But of course, I mean, you're of course well aware of the fact that when we're talking about non-Brahmins, we're talking essentially about 97% of the population. We're talking about a range of communities, castes from different regions. And you obviously gave examples of different dialects, a couple of dialects being spoken in Vidar. So, but I was trying to understand if we can study them as mutually exclusive sort of categories. Just because we're focusing, at least one part of the paper was focusing on, say, late 19th century, early 20th century, when non-Brahmins were taking recourse to the print technology. They were doing a lot of writing and speaking. But in that course, barring Jyotirao Phule perhaps, most of the non-Brahmins that come after Jyotirao Phule, they definitely had some streaks of Sanskrit language getting infused with their own dialects, for instance. But of course, they use it for their own purposes of non-Brahmin activism and fighting against the Brahmins and so on and so forth. So I was just trying to understand how do we sort of try and reconcile this sort of paradox or dilemma wherein non-Brahmin writers are using some kind of Sanskrit language, knowingly or unknowingly perhaps, but yet they try to assert a particular kind of anti-caste rhetoric in their writing. So it would be very interesting to know what you think about that. The second very specific question is about temporality. I mean, one part of the paper focuses on was late 19th, early 20th century, and then you of course come to as late as early 21st century in terms of how dialects have evolved or how a particular kind of Marathi language has consolidated its hegemonic sort of presence in everyday life. So I was trying to understand, I mean, how can we understand that historical trajectory from early 20th century to the present times? And can we think of certain inflection points, some major events that that might have happened from early 20th century to the present times, which we can think of, which led to this reinforcing of Brahminical Marathi that you're talking about. So maybe something on that. Second speaker, Swam, thank you for that very interesting talk. Of course, I don't have much of a background in quantitative analysis, but I was intrigued with the kind of analysis you gave us about caste, gender, other different categories. But I think even in those categories, I was wondering if we can again look at caste and gender, for instance, as mutually exclusive sort of categories. Because I think in one particular segment we talk about there being inequality in English language performance of students, and caste gap is larger than the gender gap. So, but I mean, even if we take that as granted, I was trying to understand if there is any kind of data which looks at both caste and gender at the same time. So a kind of intersectional sort of data, if at all, if we can call it that. And perhaps, so caste and gender, caste and class, that kind of data. Do we have that kind of data? And do you think that could anyway significantly sort of make our understanding any better with that kind of data? For Karan, again, it was very interesting because I think I was thinking there are two questions from my side, both I think slightly theoretical. So first question is about, you spoke about proficiency in English as one of the main sort of issues that you're dealing with. I was trying to understand if you are focusing both, if you're focused, when you say proficiency in English, are we talking in terms of speaking, reading and writing? And how do we sort of try and theoretically understand what proficiency means? So for instance, I'll just give you one example perhaps. So in reading, it's not just about, of course, saying or speaking something in correct grammar. So it's also about, I mean, the way discrimination is going to take place is even if you speak in correct grammar, people are going to judge you for speaking in a certain way. You're going to stutter, stammer, perhaps. You're going to get mocked and ridiculed for that. If I mean, a correct sort of English language is also directly linked with speaking in a certain rhythm, certain flow. You have to speak in a certain speed. So I'm wondering if you are taking those things into account, and would that be possible to ask students to share those kind of experiences as to what do they exactly think are the reasons of discrimination? I mean, yes, of course, correct grammar is one of them, but I'm wondering if you can go a bit further than that, and I'm just trying to maybe push you for that. Second is a slightly more general sort of question, which is about the category Dalit Bahujan itself. I myself am sort of struggling with that with my own work, but we all know that there is some kind of controversy with the way we use Dalit Bahujan. So I think, if I'm not wrong, the way you're using it is as one term and without any gap between Dalit and Bahujan. So I know certain scholars who use it with a gap in the middle. They use it as a hyphenated category, for instance. So that comes with its own set of concerns and issues. I was wondering if what do you think about, I mean, if we maybe just use Bahujan as a category and subsume Dalits under Bahujans, if that would anyway substantially sort of make our understanding any different, any better to whatever you're working on. So just I think these two broad questions. And maybe after you all answer these questions, we can go the door open for others to chip in. Mayur, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So actually, I'm agree with the limitations of categorization formations. Like, it's a huge debate. Even the non-Brahmins debate, even Srinivas call non-Brahmin as a Shudras only, and then. But I found one reference where the Ambedkar is also referring himself as a non-Brahmin scholar. So I am taking account of the disparities between within categories of non-Brahmins. That's I agree. But in terms of scholarship, they have something ground on that issues. So that's one. And then first thing is that which you pointed out. Initially, the late Pule's, like after Pule's, many Satyashodhaks people also use the language, Sanskritized language, or the similar language which was using by the privileged caste. I found, as per my understanding, is at least now is saying. So at least when I was presenting, I used the term Buddhist concept as a normalized language. So the entirely language which constructed by a certain caste, and these students, particularly coming from the non-Brahmin sections, they also accepted and they normalized, because every was thinking it's an educated language, it's an urbanized language, it's an elite people language, and they also responded some extended to in similar language, which I agree with that thing. Secondly, the tragedy is about colonial and shift today's, like about tragedy. I think it's a big I would like to call it a tragedy in that terms, like today, even though if non-Brahmins people, they feels inferior with by using their own dialect also, because there is no communication, even though what they speaks or they thinks in that language and what their text give them. But while going tragedy, I will say it's a transitions also, rather than calling it a tragedy. I call transition in the sense of that the section of coming from non-Brahmin sections, from Shudra and then untouchable and other communities also, to entering education started, and their communication with that language also increased. So like tragedy, I don't know, shall we call tragedy or shall we call transition? We'll think about this question again, I think.
Yeah. So shall I respond? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so regarding the category that you were referring to, Dalit Bahujan, so I am particularly referring to the students coming from OBCs and SCs context. The participants, comprise those who have been part of an, informal Dalit Bahujan students group in the university. I interviewed those students group, they are like a, informal Dalit Bahujan students group who are raising questions and concerns around these issues of inclusion and exclusion to the university and demanding and voicing their concerns. So this was the group where, which I, from which, I from which I interviewed my participants, right? So I'm referring to those groups of students when I'm referring to Dalit Bahujans. Another thing that you were asking was, when you mentioned that proficiency is an issue. So when I'm talking about proficiency, so the university structure prioritized, demands students to engage with complex readings in English and to be able to participate in classroom discussions, in other, in writing academic assignments in English, right? So when I'm referring to proficiency in English, I'm particularly referring to the proficiency to be able to speak in English, to be able to participate in the classroom discourses and to be able to read and write complex English text which are being given in the classroom, and then, write their assessments in English. So many, one of my research participants mentioned that, whatever I was writing in English, though this student was submitting their assessment in English, but the student was sharing that, whatever I was writing in English, faculty never understood what I wrote. Right. So it also has to deal with, unless you sound particular in a particular language, unless you write particular jargons, you will not be, qualified as a, quote unquote scholarly enough to be able to survive in the English medium university. Yeah. I hope I have somehow addressed your question.
Yeah, so I think these points about intersectionality is very interesting. I mean, on gender, I just wanted to benchmark the gaps with the gender gaps in English. So I have done some work on gender and math score using the same data, and we were looking at teachers' stereotypical belief about gender being an important determinant for math learning. And there we found large gender differences based on these teachers' beliefs, but that was in the context of math. So what it seems is for math, because the stereotype is, there is a stereotype with respect to gender and math, or gender and STEM, there is a gap, and those type of stereotypes matter for that gap. But for caste, there is no such gender gap. For English language, there is no such gender gap. There is a huge caste gap, right? So that's sort of a contrast. Now, regarding caste and class, so the analysis that I presented was taking into account the class to the extent there is data, in the sense that there is household wealth, data, which was used as a control variable in those analysis. So I was not delving into the intersectionality, but sort of getting rid of the class gaps and looking at pure caste gaps to the extent possible. But definitely, I think it is possible that the caste gaps vary by gender, and the caste gaps may also vary by class. Right. So these are some things which are worth investigating, and I will definitely look into them.
Sorry, I forgot to ask Nilesh a question. Nilesh, of course, it's very interesting, and most of the things I think I'm trying to work myself as well for my own thing. So I found it very interesting. But just a very specific question on, if we are thinking in terms of how there should be more content per se on anti-casteism in school textbooks. So are we talking in terms of having more factual information, more historical sort of information? Because I'm also slightly, wondering how can we think about comprehension skills or comprehension levels of an 8th standard student or a 10th standard student. So how are we going to decide, or in terms of how much should be included at one particular level. So, I mean, that's a very subjective thing to ask or say, but do we have any examples from some maybe private schools or some private centers who are trying to do something similar? I mean, how much is too much is the only question I'm asking over here. And I think, and a second thing was, I think one of the biggest issues, at least which I thought, which needs to be included perhaps in all the codes that you showed us, was I think there is absolutely no mention of the perpetrators of casteism, for instance. It's very vague, it's very abstract. And there is no mention of, say, for instance, Brahmins or upper caste, or who are the people who actually started this system altogether. So that is perhaps one thing which could be included. And it's also very striking. I mean, the very first code which was presented had this first line that said Indian social structure was based on inequality. So there itself, inequality gets consigned to history when it says Indian social structure was based on inequality, as if Indian social structure is very much equal today. So, but yeah, I mean, what do you think about the first question and about how much should be included and how much analytical nuance is possible at that level in terms of comprehension skills? So,
Yeah, so this is very nice question. So first question is all about whenever we are talking about the caste description in the textbooks, it's all about there is a raising the question about child-centric approach, how much we have to include it in the textbooks. So this is the one of the major problem in that, how much we have to include it. So that's what I was personally thinking about. There should be the separate workshop in the schools should be happening about these things. So, but how much we have to include it about it. So there is no any connection between that. Eighth class they have mentioned about this much. Then ninth class they have mentioned about this much. Then 10th class. So there is, as such, I didn't find any connection about it. So my major objective of this research about how caste taught in textbooks, and then that I will look at how student and teacher is experiencing caste, and I'm looking at the larger experiences about the caste. And how child is learn about the caste, how understand from his childhood, what the stages are there, how he understand the caste, which stage, how much is understanding. And then at the university level is also about the state already has introduced about caste concept in curriculum. But many studies like, as I mentioned about the Bansodes and Kane studies, these two studies that are done at the undergraduate level, and they are saying student they have very limited knowledge about the caste. Caste is in the practice, but never discussed openly about in the classroom as well. So this is like I'm trying to look at how capture the experiences of caste through textbook learning and as general their experiences in the society. So I don't know about how much have to include in the textbook, but I'm looking at this with the Ambedkarite perspective. It's based on the social justice, and other scholar has also written on the caste. So that how we can include in the textbooks, and how much like we will think about how much like once like I have done the research on the basis of student understanding. What age and what stage they can understand how much on the basis of that. Maybe I can say to suggest this should be included in the textbooks. Yeah, thank you.
Questions on that? Yeah. Sorry, how much time do we have?
Hi, there are two questions online, one for Mayur and another one for Soham. I'll just read them out. For Mayur, in regards to non-Brahmin Marathi dialect and alienation of the same in the larger political structure, are you suggesting mere recognition of the dialects or to include the non-Brahmin Marathi dialect in formal languages of the state? The question is from Mahmood Bhuyan, who's a doctoral researcher. For Soham, it is really interesting how caste and classroom practices synchronize the learning of English in schools. When it comes to ST group, it is not homogeneous across the country. ST in Northeast India are much efficient and fluent compared to ST communities in mainland India. Even though Northeast India only has 11% of ST population of the country. It would be really nice if we can also highlight these differences in learning, in the learning processes among STs of different regions. Thank you.
Take the next question.
Can I answer?
Mayur, can we take all questions and then?
Sorry.
Mayur, can you just wait for now? We can just take questions first and
Yeah.
we can. Yeah. Thank you.
My question is to Soham, largely a methodological concern. Like when you explored teachers' belief, and you said that that does have an impact. I'm just trying to understand what kind of belief, because one is I can believe that caste plays a role because somebody comes from an oppressed caste, a Dalit can't learn, cognitive faculty nahi hai. That could be my belief, or my belief could be that I understand caste, gives certain affordances, doesn't give some, and that is what I will have to work with. Believing that caste doesn't play an impact can also be, we don't believe in caste kind of a thing. So there could be two kind of beliefs with caste, no? That yes, some are not meant for cognitive tasks, or I know it would have affected the background, so I need to mentor more. Which of these two beliefs got captured in the tool that you were using? That I wanted to know.
Thank you for presenters for brilliant presentation. Sorry, I didn't attend the whole session, but my question for Karan, you mentioned about socioeconomic status of students. I just wanted to know, have you come across any differences or variations in terms of socioeconomic status or the type of institution? I have a lot of questions for you, Nilesh. I'm very fascinated by your work because I've done something similar in my body of work as well. So I have a few technical questions for you. You mentioned 3 sets of curricula. I want to know what those sets are. And you also mentioned that you will be taking the analysis of the textbook to the interviews, and you will be asking some specific questions. Are you also considering doing classroom observations to understand how they are enacting such topics in the classroom? And just to comment, you mentioned about how much to be included. I've done similar study, and it's very difficult to quantify that how much coverage should one have around these topics. And just the last comment about confusion. Yes, I also face a lot of confusion in understanding how these topics are illustrated or portrayed in the textbooks. Thank you.
Again, I was not able to attend all of the session, but I was there till Soham's presentation, and then I just came into the discussion at the end. This might have been, I have a hunch that it could have been covered in Karan's presentation, but I guess when we think about cost, my kind of selfish relationship with this is also, I think about neurodivergence and mental health. And I guess my question is, or one of my concerns is that very often is there are other historical axes of marginality that can mean that questions of neurodivergence or differences of cognition and approaches to language or learning language often go unrecognized, almost up until the higher education level or at different stages of learning in different ways. And because you spoke, Soham, about the attitudes of teachers, one of the questions that, again, perhaps nuances statistics is to ask, when we even measure attitudes of teachers, how well are they sort of equipped to even, it's not just a problem of bias, it's a problem of sometimes, even when you come up with a solution for how to mentor a student, you're not really thinking about their own relationship to learning as it's been informed by multiple competing or sometimes correlative axes of experience, marginality, sometimes even some of their strengths just go unnoticed because of these challenges. So yeah.
Can we just have Karan or Mayur? Do you want to respond? Do you want to start?
Yeah.
We'll just keep it. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for asking these questions. Recognition of the dialect to include of non-Brahmins. So we have three methodologies. One when I was in conclusion part. So first methodology to include of non-Brahmin dialect in the language, that is the one way, or other is to already constructed language. So what's happening today in the Marathi textbook specifically, I would like to describe in the one way. There are some chapters in the every years written by non-Brahmins author in the language, even the non-Brahminical Marathi. But what is happening? There is a compartment again. It's a Brahminical Marathi and it's a non-Brahminical Marathi. And then any student has to learn from the both way, but answer or the teaching methodology or learning, everything will be in the language of the Brahminical Marathi. So what can we do? That's also question now. We want to teach the student also, they have to also learn. So my point is that it's required to be reconstructed language, should not be compartment, it should be inclusivity in the terms of language, and should not be symbolically some chapters in the language, but there are conscious attempt to remove the non-Brahminical dialect from the language. So it is also required to include some non-Brahminical dialect in the language, so like whatever the standardized language constructed in Marathi. So it will be some justice to the language or the non-Brahminical Marathi dialect. So that is I want to say.
Thank you, Mayur. Karan, do you want to quickly respond?
Yeah, I don't have I don't have an answer, but what we need to do is that we there is a need to constantly engage with the question of language and how power structures operate within the university spaces. At a more immediate level, one needs to work with what do teachers really think about these students. How can they create more inclusive spaces for students coming from the marginalized communities, and to be able to engage with what are some of the practices which are more egalitarian. At an immediate level, what we need to do is that we can include some academic reading writing courses across curriculum. We can sensitize teachers, faculty members. We can set up translation cells, bringing multilingual resources material in the classroom. I think that is something we can actually work upon. Yeah.
Thank you, Karan. Nilesh, so quickly.
Okay, so I have got three questions which are extremely relevant. So I'm going to give you some very short replies, and maybe you can talk later. So first is ST, a non-homogeneous group. Absolutely true. The study was done in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, so it doesn't allow me to look at that type of heterogeneity. Now, regarding teachers' belief, how to measure attitude of teachers. So, I mean, this was done through a structured questionnaire. So there had to be some very specific questions on measuring the attitudes. And this was also done not by me, but by the Young Lives project. Now, I mean, the problem of having a structured questionnaire is that you focus on something and therefore you lose out on something else, right? I mean, you are sort of reducing it to a very specific set of questions. Now, exactly how the teachers interpreted this question, what do they think when they respond to this question that, students' caste determines their ability. I don't know fully how exactly they interpret it, but from the analysis, what it seems is that the responses are at least partly capturing their prejudice. It kind of shows, because we find that students who are taught by these type of teachers are disproportionately hard in their learning, right? So, and this is coming from a very rich model which takes care of many other things, which we can talk about later after the session, perhaps, if there is interest. But my understanding is that it may capture other things, but it is definitely partially capturing their prejudice about caste.
Hello, thank you for your question. It's a really nice question. So there are three set of the textbooks, which is based like NCERT textbooks. Since the independence, India has produced three set of the textbooks, and this is the last which I'm talking about, the National Curriculum Framework 2005. This is based on the last set of the textbooks, and already people have done the studies on three set of the textbooks. But this last set of the textbooks, which has include about the caste. So that's what I'm looking only the last set of the textbooks, which is specifically including looking social sciences textbooks, is talking about the caste in the textbooks. And talking about the interviews, this description is feeding to my interviews. On the basis of this description, I will develop the questionnaire and ask to teacher and students. In terms of the observation is problematic because of there are ethical questions, but I'm thinking to do it. But other raising the question about my own positionality. And I'm talking about even I'm attending the classroom observation, there is a power relation between teachers, students, and as attending the classes over there and understanding their teacher-student experiences, their teaching pedagogies of the teachers and student experiences, what kind of the question they are asking, how the discussion is happening. Beyond the textbook description, also their student have questions or not about the caste issues. So these things have like power relation questions and how teacher are responding to the students' questions. So this, as of now, I didn't think about that, but I'm looking to do it like participatory observation if the teachers and like colleges allow me to do it. But for addressing this, I'm looking at first. And FGD is also one of the option, focus group discussion, but that is also a tricky question. In other ethical question is raising, and caste is a very sensitive issue. Talking in a classroom also about the caste. So because of the sensitive issues, whenever like I have done my MPhil and in the MPhil also I have collected the data, and I got a response from the parents because of my positionality, being as the lower caste background and my lower caste identity. People were asking the question about my own identity. So if they're asking the own like question about my identity, then there is no like open discussion about the caste, how the like caste. And most of the teachers also belong to the other caste. And whenever I'm discussing about the caste, that's what I'm choosing, like the textbook description as to understand the experiences of the student and teacher, to understand how they understand the caste, how they learn, what are the sources, how they understand the caste from the society, in the formal structure, in the schooling premises. These things I'm trying to like looking in my larger research.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Suraj. Thank you to all the panelists for a really, really fascinating and nuanced discussion on the topic. We're going to break for tea and coffee now. We have our final panel left. This is the panel on language and politics in South Asia. And we'll sort of have a drinks reception after. So I hope you'll all stay on and just interact with all of us. Yeah, we're almost at the end. Thank you for staying on. Please do stay on for our final panel. We have our chair with us. Our panelists are here. So really looking forward to just wrapping up the day and celebrating with all of you then. Thank you. The tea and coffee is in the seminar room 1 downstairs, just if you go down past the reception. And we'll come back for our next panel at 4:15. Sorry, it's a short break, but 4:15 we'll begin the next panel. Thank you. There's